Welcome to our Saturday Simulcast. Not long after Purdue's 30-13 loss to Wisconsin, the Boilermakers drop a game that really turned into a lopsided game in the second half with the Badgers dominating Purdue. And we'll talk about that with Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart. I want to thank our sponsor, the Union Club Hotel. We appreciate we had dinner there on Thursday night. That might have been the highlight of the weekend, guys, for me. That was a very nice dinner there and a great spot for dinner. And they were full and big crowd, the biggest crowd in Ross-Ade Stadium in 10 years today, guys.
Really?
The Boilermakers unable to hold it together really for a lot of the game. They were tied at halftime. And I'll start with you, Tom. Certainly disappointing when you have a crowd like that, and with Wisconsin just doing kind of what it's done to Purdue and other teams. Great line play, ran the football, only threw the ball twice in the second half, and just ran it down through Purdue's throat and came away with a relatively easy, at least the last 10 minutes of the game, victory for the Badgers.
Yeah, you're right, Alan. 13-13 at halftime. Purdue should have been ahead 14-13 with the missed PAT, but I think a lot of people were feeling good at that point. Purdue only had about maybe 45 yards of offense at halftime, so they weren't doing much there in the first 30 minutes of the ball game, but they were opportunistic. And, boy, really fell apart. Like you said, they couldn't stop Wisconsin's ground game in the second half. It was that simple. They got physical. And, guys, we talked before the game, right? The MO is going to have to be similar to Iowa. You got to try to at least not shut down, but slow down, mute the Wisconsin ground game. Then you had to make Graham Mertz try to beat you, just like last week. Make the Iowa quarterback beat you. He couldn't beat you. And Purdue didn't make Graham Mertz try to beat him. He only threw 8 passes, guys. 5 of 8 passing for 52 yards. Wisconsin was classic Wisconsin today, guys. Vintage stuff, right? 209 yards rushing. Just on and on a win. We've seen this script many times, guys. And for Purdue, unfortunately, 15 losses in a row now to this team. And you have a chance to regroup, though. You're 4-3 headed to Nebraska. It'll be interesting to see how Purdue responds to this adversity.
Yeah, Brian, we have seen this formula many times. And to me, the game turned on the 70-yard run. I mean, that's kind of stating the obvious. All of a sudden, Wisconsin's first possession of the second half, right? And then all of a sudden, they just seemed to have the Badgers had control. They had control of the game before that, but like you said, they really weren't in control on the scoreboard. Purdue misses that extra point, which wasn't a good thing, but could have been ahead at the half. But Brian, what was your take on just what we saw, but also Wisconsin's domination for much of the second half?
Yeah, I thought the big run coming out of the goal line was the biggest play of the game. I thought it was the game where, you kind of figured it was an inevitability that Wisconsin eventually was going to wear you down and break one. And sure enough, but I thought that the biggest sequence of the game was when Purdue took the ball up 13-10 after Karlaftis' defensive score. They have a chance, if you can put together a touchdown drive, which you can put an asterisk next to make mention of the fact that Purdue did not do that once today of any meaningful extent. Had you been able to mount a touchdown drive right there and you go up 20-10, I thought a 2-score lead in the first half for either of these teams would have been absolutely enormous. So I thought the sequence where O'Connell threw the interception and Wisconsin got the field goal out of it, it was a heroic effort by Purdue's defense to hold them to a field goal when they had first and goal at the 1. But I thought had Purdue's offense been able to do something there and managed to get Purdue a 2-score lead, I thought that would have been enormous. But, the reality of all of this is, for as much as you figured that if Wisconsin was going to win this game, that they were just going to run over Purdue. That's not really what happened. I mean, the final numbers look like it, but what happened here today was Purdue's offense just can't get it done. This was the 4th game in 5 outings that Purdue scored only 13 points. And this was a cosmetic 13 points because the defense got you 7 of them or 6 of them. Obviously, they're not accountable for the extra point. And then they set up the other touchdown on a silver platter with the turnover they forced. So this was, just an absolutely futile offensive effort by Purdue today. And not unlike kind of what you saw against Notre Dame, Minnesota, Illinois even, only I think this one kind of took it to another level. They can play as many quarterbacks as they want. And all of that stuff. But if anybody can take away David Bell, that was your offense last week. That and Iowa throwing the ball to Purdue an inordinate number of times, and they just couldn't get anything done offensively. You know, Wisconsin's almost always going to have an advantage at the line of scrimmage. You know, Purdue doesn't run the ball well against most teams, let alone teams like Wisconsin. But they got to figure something out offensively that you can do every week and not just expect or hope that David Bell can get you 250 yards because, you know, this offense has real limitations. And, you know, to be honest with you, to be perfectly honest with you, it starts at the quarterback position. I don't think, you know, you can play three, but I don't know if you have one. I don't know if you have that guy you can win because of. You know, I think you have a bunch of players who are good enough to help you win, but I don't think they're good enough to even the playing field against the opponents that are better than you.
Yeah, you needed that special step, and it does bring, you know, David Bell. They were just swarming him like he's not been swarmed before. He barely caught a pass in the first half, and left me looking at when and if that has ever happened, which I think has only happened once. Yeah, you can't run for negative 13 yards. I mean, I don't care what happens.
That was sack yardage too, though.
I understand, but that
it's not like that makes it any better.
No, I mean, you just can't do that. I understand, but that also is indicative of what the problem was. You couldn't protect your quarterback. There was a number of sacks that just made, you know, George Karlaftis wasn't the only good number 5 on the field today. Wisconsin's number 5 was unbelievable and made a huge difference there as well. Tom, you know, you look at this, and I agree that this is a chance to. Yeah, you got to regroup and go to Nebraska and try to get some things done. And we're only a couple hours after this game is over. But Brian asked some serious questions. You know, what is up with this offense? And you know, Wisconsin only 342 yards. Now they ran for 290 of it, and that's not good. Purdue had some problems tackling as well, but it just brings you a lot of questions. It's crazy what a difference a week makes in terms of that. And Brian said earlier this week, which is true, nothing can take away the win over the number 2 team on the road. But this does leave you Purdue still scrambling to try to get to 6 wins, and it's going to be a challenge to do so based on what they have in the rest of the schedule.
Yeah, Jeff Brom said in the post game how they didn't handle success this week. Obviously, you know, quarterback-wise, guys, you know, they said they always evaluate the quarterback position. It'll be interesting to see who that's going to be next week. But like Brian said, I'm not sure if it matters. I still think Aiden O'Connell's the guy that gives you the best chance to win, just because of his ability to throw the football. The immobility is always a concern. You talked about the sacks, Alan. 6 for 43 yards against Purdue today. 5 turnovers.
Yeah.
You know, 3 interceptions, 2 lost fumbles, could have been 4 interceptions, really. The Durham thing was called a fumble when he had the ball taken away from him. And 206 yards of offense. And guys, Purdue didn't score a point in the second half. Purdue didn't score a point in the second half against Minnesota. Purdue scored 7 points in the second half against Illinois. So a lot, you know, halftime's when you make your money, right? Halftime's when you come up, you go to your plan B, your plan C, you come up with counter punches, and Purdue goes to the well and comes out in the second half and hasn't done much of anything in these last few Big Ten games. So we all know the concerns. We all know the weaknesses. Can they be fixed, though, guys? We're coming up on Halloween here. We're 7 games deep. And you kind of are what you are, I think. And, you know, it will be interesting to see what counter punches this staff comes up with. Collar's getting a little tighter, 4-3. You know, 5 games to go, but they're winnable games still, guys. I was thinking about that walking home after the game tonight. There's probably a good chance Purdue's going to be 5-5 going into its last 2 games of the year. The game at Northwestern and Wrigley Field and the home game against IU. So, but first things first, Nebraska, right? They were off this week. They're going to have 2 weeks to prep. We'll see what the Boilermakers got when they head to Lincoln next Saturday.
And I think too, and Brian, you know, Jeff Brom's got to muster up that will to get it done, just because Nebraska is going to be desperate, you know, and they've got all kinds of issues. And again, it's the week-to-week proposition where right now it looks like Purdue's in a hole that it can't dig it out of. And And that yet Penn State, Illinois gives you another example of how crazy this Big Ten can be. So what all looks won last week and all looks lost this week, you have to just kind of take it, move on. And that'll be a challenge, Brian, I think for Jeff Brom and staff to find ways. And you're right. You can't, you got to find a way to muster up offense. You've got to get back to who you are, who your identity is supposed to be. And that's supposed to be a team that is supposed to be very hard to defend.
Right. And does that happen from week to week in the middle of a football season? Yeah, hard to know. It feels like for crying out loud, he had 3 quarterbacks on the field at once today. That stuff is kind of eye candy. I don't think it's what was necessarily important at Iowa last week. It's just such a novelty that, it's worth talking about. But they won last week because David Bell was Superman. That they scored because, their wide receiver was special and their offense works against Iowa. The matchups against Iowa have always favored Purdue, just like the matchups against Wisconsin have always favored Wisconsin against Purdue. That's not going to change, but they're trying stuff here. And it feels like that analogy I always use about when a kid doesn't want to eat his vegetables, he just spreads them around on his plate to make it look like he's doing something, and you're really not accomplishing a whole lot. That's sort of the way things felt today, was that he's running quarterbacks in and out of the game, just grasping at straws, looking for answers. But, stuff changes real quick. Everything looked lost after Minnesota, and it looked like they turned a corner, and all of a sudden they were on fire after Iowa. And now here you are again. You'd love as a program to not be in that position where it's that dizzying back and forth between elation and, angst. But it is a worthwhile reminder that, hey, they could go to Nebraska this weekend and play well and win, and it might look exactly the same as it did after Iowa, for all we know. It's a funny game and an inconsistent program.
61,000 people too, and that's what thing is interesting. We were talking about that even with Nate Barrett after our post-game radio tonight, is exactly what you just said. There is a difference. That is a good thing for where the program is. You have the biggest crowd in 10 years, and it wasn't Notre Dame here. That's impressive. Yeah, you sent them home with not a real happy event. But if you do go to Nebraska and win, you got Michigan State coming back here, and it'll be another game. The good thing is you still have your fans there. You got to keep them. That is a clear thing. I'm not saying they're all going anywhere, but it is important for this program to finish this season well. And we've kept talking about the need to get to 6 wins, at least make it exciting to watch. And that was the thing. And Wisconsin's got the ability to do that to you. They've made Purdue teams look bad over the years. If you look at the scores in this streak that Wisconsin's put up, it's pretty impressive, the spread. So all these things tie into it to making what Purdue can hope to be next week. And all you can do is focus and move on. I was going to ask Tom anything else to come out of post game in terms of any other injuries or anything else that of note that Jeff Brom talked about.
Yeah, nobody asked about injuries, Alan. He didn't bring anything up.
Yeah.
He was obviously disappointed. He put the loss at his own feet, and got to block better, got to run the ball better, got to get quarterback play. He said it wasn't very good. Not many guys could take a bow after that game.
No.
We talked about Karlaftis a little bit. Obviously, his big 56-yard scoop and score was a lot of fun. But the big moments were few and far between. Payne Durham had a big game, guys, but I think they were willing to let Payne Durham get his catches. I don't think they thought Payne Durham was going to beat him. They were focused on other things, and Jeff Brom was aware of that. They were trying to take those outside receivers away, and he talked about that. And they did a good job. So again, credit Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, no question.
My goodness, this is a great defense. Statistically coming in, it was great. And you talked about Leo Chanel, Allen. Those linebackers they've got, it's a good defense. And again, I always, Brian mentioned this or alluded to it. Alan, you did too. But again, it's that old adage. Things are never as good as you think they are, but they're never as bad as you think they are. And again, we get examples every weekend of this. That's why you don't jump off the cliff if things go bad. And you certainly don't start printing trophies if you win a game. And these things change so much week to week. And again, you guys have hit on that already. So it's awfully disappointing for a lot of people. But again, you got to turn the page and you got to wake up and show up the next day, right? And that's how you're defined. And we'll see how Purdue picks itself up off the mat here.
All right. One thing that did happen today, at least I'm wearing my Center for Cancer Research hat today. They did a good job. One of the missions, and I work a little bit with that outfit that they were able to impress upon the importance of research for cancer at Purdue. So we'll give them kudos. It was Hammer Down Cancer Day. Brian, I will end this on a positive note because you're sitting in Mackey Arena. We've heard so there's, and we're not saying we're basketball, but basketball is just around the corner. Now we'd heard some vibe that Purdue had another scrimmage today, and Jaden Ivey was really, really good. But there's a lot to look forward to in Purdue men's basketball upcoming, and you're going to have a chance to. They open up on the 4th of November. It won't be long, and then a week or so of practice, and then it will be the open of the season. So give us something on that in terms of what you've obviously written already a lot about basketball, but you're sitting in the facility. End this on a positive note about the excitement that might be happening in Mackey Arena this year.
Yeah, I'm sitting here because the Wi-Fi works best out here. Obviously it's dark, but I've got my little workaround here. I've got my phone set up to front light me. So this could be our Halloween edition here of our simulcast. But yeah, no, they had a scrimmage this morning. Obviously didn't go, but I got the SID sent out stats. Zach Edey was the one who was really good. 35.
Okay.
Jaden Ivey is pretty much always good. He was, I think he had 20, made 2 threes. I don't have the stats in front of me. I know Edey had 35 and 14. Purdue has an All-American at center returning from last season. And I don't know who Purdue's best center is, because Zach Edey, if he's not one of the best big guys, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country this year, I will be a little surprised. I mean, he's just doing everything right now, and really, really set to make a huge jump from one season to the next. And he was damn good this past year. They got a lot going for him. They're big. When your biggest problem is figuring out how you're going to get enough minutes for 2 elite players, that's a pretty good problem to have. Now, I'm not saying that's Purdue's only question going into the season. They have to get better defensively. They have to shoot better. They need, I think, improved guard play. I think they have to obviously onboard a couple of young guys really quick at that 4 position. They have to take care of the basketball at a really high level. But I think, a lot of stuff setting up here for Purdue to be everything people expect them to be, and, maybe even a little more.
Yeah, that's what's going to be a fun night. I had a chance to watch the scrimmage last week, and though, as Matt Painter said, they have work to do. They've got a lot of parts that are going to be really interesting to watch. All right, we did end on a positive note, and I want to thank our sponsor, the Purdue Union Club Hotel. Go ahead. You can keep going.
I actually had one more little football thing to say. I didn't see the opportune moment to interject into our conversation with this, but we've been talking about 6 wins as that kind of magic number for Purdue. And while that would be a significant deal for them this season after they were where they were the last 2 years, you also had an opportunity here this year to do something even a little more than,
no doubt,
hit that bare minimum win total and go play Central Michigan in Detroit or whatever it would be. The Minnesota game was a winnable game. If this was the most beatable Wisconsin team on paper, I think that Purdue's played in, a decade and a half, probably for almost the duration of that decade and a half in which Purdue's not beaten them. And I know Purdue almost got them a couple of years ago here, but the Big Ten West is not very good this year. And, I think, Purdue had an opportunity here, and I'm not saying they don't necessarily have an opportunity left, but you've let 2 winnable games slip through your grasp here in your home field. I shouldn't say that about the Wisconsin game, because at no point in time was this game in Purdue's control after halftime, at least. And I just think, there was an opportunity here to do even more than hit that, 6-win mark. And that's probably the disappointment here as much as anything out of these last 2 home games for Purdue.
Yeah, and especially after when you sandwich those two losses with the win over the number 2 team in the country. So, yeah, that's where the work needs to be done. And you're right. I think 6 is the bare minimum, but and there would have been opportunity for more. So it will be an ongoing story. We'll be talking next week after probably talking to Tom in the press box at Lincoln after the Boilermakers take on.
Runza.
That's what?
He'll be at Runza.
Yeah. What and when is that? Is that a 3:30?
They've always got the post-game Valentino's pizza in Lincoln, so they'll have pizza in the press box.
They'll treat you right up there.
Go find Parker's Roadhouse. That place is pretty good. Pretty good barbecue. It's way off of campus. You'd have to look it up and drive a half an hour to get there.
And that is a 3:30 Eastern start, correct? So it'll be
correct. You're right. Yeah, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central. Yep.
Same time frame. All right, guys. Until then. Until at least for the Saturday simulcast, we'll do that again next week, and there'll be much more to talk about as after Purdue and Nebraska take a what will be an important game for both teams, and it'll be an interesting one to see how that comes out. All right, I want to thank the Union Club Hotel and Brian and Tom for joining us. We'll see you next week on our Saturday simulcast. We'll look forward to that. Have a great weekend, the rest of your weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next week.